Hey everybody, I'm Catherine Kramer and I am the Manager of Industry Engagement at the Data Science Institute here at Columbia. And what my role is focused on is working with our wonderful industry affiliates. And we are really happy today to have Elsevier visiting us. Elsevier, well, you're going to hear about what Elsevier is up to. And they are one of our newer affiliates. We are absolutely thrilled to have them on board and really excited to have them here on campus today. And I know you're going to be really excited and interested to hear about the work that they're doing. And they're going to be introduced by Gabriel from Elsevier. Anne is the Vice President for Global Strategic Networks at Elsevier, and she's based here in New York. And Anne's going to come up and tell you a bit about our speakers for the afternoon. So Anne, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks so much to all of you for being here today. I'm Anne Gabriel. I'm VP for Strategic Networks at Elsevier. I've been with Elsevier for more than 15 years, and before that I was with Cambridge University Press. And it's really been a long journey at Elsevier that we've been taking from traditional publisher to information analytics providers and working with researchers to really accelerate that sort of progress in science. I wanted to thank Columbia University's Data Science Institute leadership and support. That includes Jeanette Wing, Sharon Sputz, Catherine Kramer, and Jessica Rodriguez. We are really, really proud to be affiliated with this dynamic institution. This evening, 3 of Elsevier's data science experts have been invited as part of your iCubed series. And I just wanted to say a few words, not only about them, but just quickly to say, at Elsevier, we have a lot of data related to R&D. We have author profiles of 12 million scientists in our Scopus database, 90 million patent records, and we handle 1.4 manuscripts a year and publish these in about 350 of them in 2,500 peer-reviewed scientific journals. So you can imagine sitting on that data set, not to mention the data that is with our parent, RELX Group, which is includes LexisNexis, all the legal information, and Risk Solutions, which includes insurance records and bankruptcy records, and other things, how we are triangulating this data to create new knowledge. So there are many among our team who can articulate this better than I can, and so I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce our presenters. These include today Dr. Ron Daniel, who is the director of Elsevier Labs. He was educated as an electrical engineer, and he's done extensive work on metadata standards such as the Dublin Core, RDF, and PRISM. Before joining Elsevier in 2010, he worked at a startup that was acquired for its automatic classification technology and consulted on taxonomy and information management issues for 9 years. Ron received his PhD in electrical engineering from Oklahoma State University and was a postdoctoral researcher at Cambridge University and the Los Alamos National Laboratory. And Ron comes to us from the Bay Area today, and I'm delighted that he made the trip to support this initiative. Also joining us is Dr. Jessica Cox. She's a data science and technology research director for Elsevier Labs. She received her PhD in biomedical science with an emphasis in environmental health and nutrition from Ohio State University, and she completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Columbia University, right here, where she researched associations between arsenic metabolism and nutritional biomarkers in vulnerable populations within the United States and Bangladesh. So Jessica can also answer questions about what it's like to make the leap from, doing a postdoc at a place like Columbia to an organization like Elsevier, and we're delighted to have her. And also, last but not least, is Corey Harper, a data scientist also with Elsevier Labs, technology research director as well. He has spent nearly 15 years building digital libraries, administering library systems, and managing library metadata. And he's held metadata library positions at both New York University and the University of Oregon, where his research focused on linked data, digital repositories, and library discovery. So with that said, thank you for your time. I'm really anxious that you get to know our team. Please, I'm based in New York. If you ever have any questions about Elsevier, not necessarily about the data science piece, although I'm happy to answer that, but more about our company, strategic objectives and opportunities, I am more than happy to answer them for you personally or through Catherine. So thanks. Ron, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. Okay. So I'll start off with a couple of questions. I was going to ask, can you hear me? But I can hear from the sound in the auditorium that you probably can. So the second question, can anybody here imagine a talk on a subject that is less exciting than this? Okay. All right. So I want to show you something that I think is really cool and why this is exciting. And then we'll go on and talk more about this. So sometime when you've got a chance, go to neuroelectro.org. Okay, not right now. Don't take out your phones, but go to neuroelectro.org and see what they're doing there. Okay, or what they were doing. This is work that was done by a student at the time at Carnegie Mellon University. He's now faculty somewhere in the Northwest. I've forgotten exactly where. But what they're doing is going out to the literature and extracting neuroelectrophysiological parameters, the resting membrane potential, the rise time constants on spike trains, this and that and the other, and doing that for a variety of different types of neurons. Why? So that they can start doing groupings of different classes of neurons and seeing which ones are similar and which ones are different and why that's the case. And does this deal with anatomy? Does it deal with disease? What's going on there? So I thought that was really neat. And part of the inspiration here was a figure like this. When the creator of this, a guy named Srijoy Tripathi, showed this to me. So what we've got here, in this case, this is the resting membrane potential, kind of the static state of a neuron and what its voltage is before it starts having a spike with reference to the rest of the body. And it averages around negative 40 millivolts. Okay. But when you look at this, I should say, each of these dots is one measurement from a paper. Okay? So each of these columns is one kind of a neuron. So, some are well studied like pyramidal cells and some not so well studied, and, I would have no idea exactly which type of neuron that would be. But we see what their voltages are, and we can go to lots of other electrophysiological parameters, about 47 of them. But step back and take a look at this. And, here we have results from, a pretty good number of papers. And this is the sort of thing that gives you an overview of the field. And at least for me, I start looking at that and wanting to ask lots of questions. Okay, I'm going to skip forward just a little bit because this is all about, the different parameters that are being measured and so on and so forth, or the kinds of clustering that can be done with the data, the data that's available for any one particular neuron type. But when I look at this, I start coming up with questions. And, so these orange ones are automatically derived values, and can we do something to make sure they're correct? All the blue ones were manually curated. Can we do something to make that more efficient? What's special about this one here, our lowest value? Why is there anything particularly special about that? Is there anything special about the highest value? Why do some of these have such a range of values? Are there errors going on here? Are these different species? Are there different medications or drugs or diseases? Or, what's going on here? And, here, this is the only measurement of this neuron type. So is this an opportunity for more study? Can some student go in and say, well, let's take a look at this neuron type in other species, under other conditions? Is that a PhD waiting to happen? Okay, is this a PhD waiting to happen to segment this and see which of these were good replicable experiments and which ones were dodgy things that should have been withdrawn? Okay, so lots of questions there. And with that, we come to the goal, my big goal here. What I really want to be doing, there are thousands and thousands of subdisciplines within science, Anne was talking about 2,500 journals. And so each journal, it might be, neuron or, something more specialized. But, if you look at those within them, there are specialized committees. I certainly don't read all of the information retrieval papers that are out there. I don't even read, all of the metadata schema papers or this or that or the other. I have my own sub-specialties. There are thousands of these sub-specialties out there, and I want people to be able to do this kind of work that was done by Neuroelectro. I want you to be able to go out and look at the literature and say, this is the literature that I really care about. And there is no existing database of this information. So I want to gather these papers together. I want to make a database that has these various values in it. Okay? And we can get this overview of the field and find out areas that are overstudied, areas that are understudied. We have big ranges of values here. Maybe some are right, some are wrong. What's going on? Okay. Are there improvements in methodology that can be made? Are some of these results old? Are there new methods that we should use to go back and remeasure some of these things? So on and so forth. So, I think there's a lot of potential for small groups who really care about this problem to get together and create their own data sets around this. Okay, and I want to help people do that. That's my goal. Okay. And Neuroelectro shows a lot of the essential points that you have to do to accomplish that goal. What are you going to use for a data source? So, well, we can talk about the literature, but there's also, a lot of existing material other places. There are existing databases, Uniprot if you're, into proteins, or Litterbase if you're into oceanic plastics, or so on and so forth. What do practitioners in the field actually need? Okay. When you look at these tables, there's going to be a lot of different stuff that's collected in them, not all of which is terribly necessary, certainly not necessary to get an overview plot like what I showed earlier. So what do we really have to extract to get started? Okay. And what do we do with the analysis? And why are we even doing this? What do we do with the results of the analysis? With the neuron properties, maybe there's a disease or a medication aspect of this that's going to help people. Are some of these things dealing with depression or anxiety? Can we see what the effect of SSRIs is, or so on and so forth? Okay, so that's the real goal. It's not to analyze data. It's to make an impact and help people's lives. Okay, now one of my personality flaws is I tend to digress. So I'm going to talk about two things here that I think are important and interesting. Okay, the important one, knowledge-based construction. How are knowledge bases currently built? Well, a lot of people, they say, oh, you want to mine the literature? Oh, well, we know how you do that. What you do is you go get a named entity recognizer, and you run your named entity recognizer across the text, and you find your named entities. And because you know the problem that you're interested in, the entities that you want to find, such as a big list of proteins or genes or neuron cell types or geographic features or, whatever it might be. And having found two named entities in a sentence, you look for the text in between them, and you come up with a relation between them, like A inhibits B, or A, overrides B as, a continental tectonic plate, or this or that or the other. Okay. And, once you've got your two entities in your relation, then boom, you've got a triple. You put it into your database, and you go back and you do that again and again. Okay. Well, so there's and we can get fancier with the NLP and find more things to extract, but there are a few problems with that. The most fundamental of which, how much of the information in the article, how much of this numeric data that we want to pull out actually exists in the running text? And how much of it isn't in the text, but it's in the figures or the tables? Okay? So sometime you can go through and you can look at an article and you can circle, or mark up the parts that do have these kinds of numeric results or don't. Okay, and you might end up with a figure that would be a data point somewhere on these plots. Now this, I think, is a really interesting plot. This was done back in the mid-'80s. What they did was they rated certain disciplines by their hardness. That doesn't mean difficulty, but it might mean, how replicable is this? So that sociology is rated as less hard than chemistry or physics. So it's not a matter of difficulty, But, we can repeat experiments in physics and expect to get pretty much the same kind of results, not so much with sociology. We expect a lot more variation there. And, there's this kind of hierarchy where sociology, economics, psychology, medicine, biology, et cetera, become more and more hard or concrete, okay? And then they looked at how much of a paper, what percentage of a paper is given in figures, as opposed, here's all the text, the denominator is the total area of text in the paper, and the numerator here is how much of that's a figure. And they came up with this truly amazing correlation coefficient between the two. I mean, 0.97. It's really an astonishing finding here, that as people's perception of difficulty increases, the number of figures, the amount of area in figures increases. And you can think of physics experiments typically having potentially billions of events going on for sample sizes. Sociology, not so much. Who knows why? It hasn't been explained, but this has been noted. This is a similar sort of thing with psychology journals that go from cognitive and behavioral practices being less hard than the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior. But what they're seeing is that, graph area goes up as it's hard. Table area tends to go up as it's less hard, probably sample size effect. But, what's going on here? And so I think, somebody who went in and actually looked at this in different papers, different disciplines, and measured how much of the paper is results, how much is bibliography, how much is intro, how much is tables and figures and equations and this and that and the other. That would be, I think, an interesting thing to see. Okay, so enough of the digressions. Let's get to the problem. Okay, I told you the goal. I want to enable thousands of communities to make databases that are going to be meaningful to them. Okay, so what's the problem? Well, the first thing, tables are a mess. How many people have ever done any kind of study of tables? Okay, several people. How many of you still believe that there is such a thing as a simple regular data table? I hear some snickers. I'm not seeing any hands going up. Okay. Once you look at this, you just lose the idea that, oh, yeah, sure, it's one table's very much like another. No, they're not. And I'm going to show you why. Okay. This is a plot of the heading latitude. Well, at least the concept latitude from many, many different tables. In this case, this was around oceanic plastics. Okay, so the most common heading for latitude is, of course, latitude. But, that's only about double the frequency of the next most common headings, latitude in degrees north, or latitude, north latitude. And, there are all these other kinds of variations, including some crazy ones like east latitude. Last time I checked, that's not quite the right concept, but never mind. Okay, so we're going to see this long-tailed distribution of different names for the thing that everybody would normally call latitude, but because people are endlessly creative and they don't like doing the same thing time and again, they change the names up a little bit. Okay? All right, well, fine. We can just go after the most common ones, right? We'll start with the most common ones, and that'll get us a long way around. Well, not exactly. Okay. The same kind of long-tailed distribution happens when you look at the format of the data within these columns. So what I'm trying to show here is, the most common format of the most common heading is right here. And we start adding other things. What did we bring in other headings? What were the combinations of headings? What was the structure of the table? So on and so forth. You put all of these things together, the product of all of these long-tailed distributions is an extremely long-tailed distribution that says, oh, okay, here's your most common case. You've got 5 tables out of 10,000. That's your most common table structure. So anybody want to go off and write code for those 5 and those 5 and those 5 and those 4 and 4 and 4 and 4 and 3 and 3 and 3 and 3 and 3 and 2 and 2. So this is not good. Okay. Now, I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly. A lot of you probably think, oh, come on, it can't be that bad. And so, we have lots of fun examples here to show that, in fact, it can be that bad. Latitude in the oil and gas industry, 2,500 times was nice, simple latitude. But, then the variations begin. Okay, we stop here, latitude degrees south at 113. That's right there. Okay, that was number 8 on the list. 16, 32, 64, 128. We're out here into the low thousands of different variations in a heading. And it's just latitude, okay? Other things, total organic content is of interest in the oil and gas industry. And, it has all the same problems. The formats of the values, well, even if we call it latitude something, what are the values like? Surely it's just degrees, minutes, seconds, right? Well, of course not. Sometimes it's degrees north or degrees south. Sometimes it's degrees, minutes, and, decimal minutes and seconds. Other times it's degrees, and then in a different column are decimal minutes, or, this or that or the other. I think Corey's favorite is when we have 6 columns that are degree, minute, second for latitude and longitude together. I think that was truly special when we saw that. Okay, so latitude. What if, I've talked about how many different names there are for the same concept. Well, the converse of that problem is also true. We have some names, particularly any single character you can think of, that show up in lots of different headings and mean lots of different things. P is that precision, phosphorus, probability, p-value, what? Okay, and it goes on and on and on, and I'm going to kind of skip through this. Never mind simple versus, rather elaborate table structures. It's just crazy. Okay, so you can't go after this one little bit at a time. What are we going to do to get data out of all this mess when I've just told you that any code you write for that table won't do the job for the other tables? Okay, well, I've already pointed out to you part of the solution here. Okay, that latitude has a lot of variations, but we see what they are right here. We have a list of lots of variations on latitude, and we know the latitude concept is something that's going to be very, very common. Latitude and longitude, depth, that's something that applies in quite a few different domains. Okay, so we handle this case, and we handle the number of values that go along with it. We're a long way towards mapping pretty much any data from any discipline that's referenced to the surface of the Earth. Just be careful that you're actually dealing with latitude on the Earth and not the Moon or Venus, etc. Okay, that tripped me up with the Venusian ionosphere as opposed to the Earth ionosphere ones. So, okay, we can do the same kind of thing, with different headings and their different names, different ways of dealing with the formats, etc. And we're going to show you more and more tricks along the way. But, I've done enough here, and Corey's going to tell you about the real work that goes on. Okay?
Can folks hear me? No. How about now? That's better. Can you hear me if I'm here-ish? Is that cool? Okay, good. So yeah, Ron did a really good job of sort of explaining the problem there and talking through also the goal of what we're trying to do. The goal here is to make systems whereby people can dig into this kind of data in a particular targeted domain of their choosing to try to figure out sort of in aggregate what the scientific literature says about their topic. And we're going to go through some examples of sort of what we're doing there. We have about 4 examples we're trying to go through. But first I want to talk about sort of some early wireframing that we did around what a system like this would even look like. And what you really need to know about this layout here, about these 4 images, is that they're all about filtering down the papers and data that you're looking at, iteratively trying to narrow your pile of stuff until you find things that are just relevant to the spike amplitudes that Ron was showing before, or the latitudes and longitudes associated with total organic content or ocean plastic. So you start by trying to query and filter the articles. And at the article level, you look for articles that you think are relevant to your domain. And you pull the tables out of those articles, and then you start trying to further filter out the tables that are the ones you care about by looking at their captions, by looking at their headers. You grab the headers themselves for those tables and further filter which columns are that you actually care about. Then the really hard part, you get down to the values level and you try to figure out which ones are actually the data points that correspond to that column and which are noise, which are additional subheaders, new table groups, new data, etc. Right? So that's how you're digging through this stuff. And we've got a set of running examples that we're going to sort of talk through each of these pieces of the process for. And the first one is this recreating Neuroelectricorg that Ron talked about, right? This is trying to look at this graduate student's project from a few years ago that was very carefully and well designed. It was automatically curated with some manual curation on top, and we need to try to see if we can do something similar with our data in an even more automated way and using our tools. We're looking at extending an Elsevier product called Geofacets, which is a product that serves the oil and gas industry. So that's where that total organic content example that Ron was talking about before comes from. We're looking at extending something called Litterbase, which is a database of observations of ocean plastics in marine environments throughout the world. And this is some research we're doing in collaboration with an oceanographer at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands who wants to build mathematical models of how the ocean's currents move plastic around. So going from observations of the distribution of plastics, can he build a function that will be able to then find its way back to the sources of those plastics? And then we're going to talk about a little bit of the start of a co-reference resolution database, and I'll explain what that is in a moment. But like I said, the first problem here is finding the relevant articles. Searching for Neuroelectricorg was easy. We had a curated list of 150 articles that were used in Neuroelectricorg, so we're starting from there. The oil and gas stuff was easier because we had the Elsevier tables that are already in the Geofacets product, and we want to mine those tables for relevant information. For the ocean plastics and for the co-reference resolution, we used essentially Boolean queries of keywords in the article text itself. And there's a lot of false positives. There's a lot of noise there. But then we can pull the tables out of that and further filter. This is a pretty naive example, but tables that have the word plastic in them might be where the measurements of ocean plastic comes from. And you get down to about 500 tables there. It's a much more manageable size of data to experiment with. And so how do we do this? Well, this is a little bit of a digression, but we have a great tool, open source tool from one of our colleagues, Darren, called Annotation Query, which gives you the ability to do some NLP querying across the literature as you essentially looking at terms, noun phrase types, dependencies, constituencies, parse trees, a variety of other different kinds of things in the grammar of the text, and then also the structure of the XML. So we want to look for keywords in the method section, or in the results section, or in the caption of a table, or in like anchor text that refers to a table. So the next step in this is to figure out your target schema. For your data, what are the things that you're actually looking for, that you care about in this database that you're going to curate across the literature for your particular discipline? In the case of the oil and gas stuff, it's depth, it's total organic content, it might be things like % carbon dioxide, and then it's a location. The ocean plastics thing, it's a location and an observation of quantities of plastic. How do you figure out what those target measurements are and then figure out how to find those in the data itself? Next step is to extract the tables from the articles. And we've actually already done that. So for Science Direct, all of our content is already in XML. So it's just a question of pulling the XML for every single article and then being able to query it, right? Like when I build those queries, I've got a set of papers. Now I've got a separate set of identifiers for the papers. So I just do a join to say, give me all the tables from this massive pile of tables we have that are referenced in that, I hate when, yep. I'm going to do that. And then I can do that, right. So what that looks like is it gives you essentially a data frame in this case, we're looking at this in Databricks and Spark Scala that is one row per table. And we have some metadata about it. We have a document identifier. We have things like the title of the article, or the title of the journal that an article is in, the title of the article itself, and then we just have the actual raw table XML, which we can then further process to look at things like, does it have captions? Does it have table groups? Do those table groups have more than one row? How many bodies rows does it have, and so forth? So we've been able to pull this stuff out, and we can start looking at it. We can start looking at things like the co-occurrence of headers themselves, right? So if you take all the tables that talk about a certain thing and look at how frequently individual headers co-occur in the same table, that gives you a hint about kinds of information that might be relevant. Latitudes and longitudes tend to cluster together, right? Things like standard deviation, you're going to find things like means and medians and modes. If you have some abbreviations, they tend to group together. There's some ambiguity in this sometimes. Numbers, mins, max, like is n part of this statistical array, or is n part of a list of elements, right? Like nitrogen and oxygen. Then we started building diagrams of those co-occurrences. And you can't really see this very well, but what this is essentially every one of those arcs represents headers that co-occur more than n times. And in this case, the n is probably, there's a lot of headers here. I'm guessing it's a pretty high n. It's probably co-occurring more than 100 times in a data set. And to get a little bit closer to what that looks like, right, I can zoom in a little bit on this here, and you can see that you have things like dates co-occurring very, very frequently. This is the ocean plastics example, right? You get co-occurrences of types of debris that would be found in the ocean, whether it be paper, rubber, glass. You get latitude and longitude co-occurring together. You get these clusters that help you then sort of understand the shape of that data that you're looking at. And you can use that to start moving towards selecting values that are relevant to things and trying to do things like recreating neuroelectric, right? You've got your neuron types and property names from a list. You find the data points that have headers that are associated with those, and you start looking for essentially the data that enables you to recreate that plot that Ron showed you at the beginning. There's a few problems here. One, those values are a little bit out of the range you would expect them to be right now, right? There's a bunch of values here that are clearly outliers. There's something wrong about them. And then the other problem is that there's a little bit less data here than you would expect. And partly that's because we're only looking at Elsevier content, not the broader set of scientific literature that Srijoy had originally analyzed. And then the other part of the problem is the manual curation that Ron talked about before. They're doing something where they're saying, we're aggregating these neurons at a certain type level, and the actual references in the literature are individual neurons of that type. And we need to find a way, a hierarchical classifier, basically, a taxonomy, to give you the ability to do that aggregation in an automated way. The lesson here, though, is that manual curation is involved in sort of making this happen. And Ron already gave you some examples of how that manual classification works in the case of, say, latitudes, right? And he showed you the variance of the actual headers associated with latitudes. You dig deeper and you look at the variance of what the pattern masks of those values look like. So these are sort of just regular expression pattern mask groupings of what the data in the cells look like for these values. You have numbers. You have numbers with a symbol and then a number and then a tick. That's your degree-minute combination, right? That's that pattern. You might see the north and south in the header associated with that. That's another fun one that you look at. What we can start doing there is writing functions to actually normalize those. So in that number, degree, number pattern, you've got a degree and a minute. We can split that on the degree symbol, take the degree portion, add to it the decimal representation of the minute portion by dividing it by 60, and you get that numeric representation. You do that deeper and deeper and deeper through the different patterns. You do things like looking for that S in the headers. To do anything with that data, it's not 72 degrees south, it's negative 72 degrees, right? That's what you need there. You find that flag says I need to flip the sign, turn it into a negative value, and you can work with it that way. So what we're able to do with this is start aggregating data in this ocean plastic space, for example. Looking for the different variations on latitude and longitude, normalizing those values to a single format, a single orientation. There's not enough data to really plot everything, but it's enough to get a user of a kind of interface like the one that Ron sort of described at the beginning of this talk, started in a curation process. We've done some additional work on then looking at things like items per kilometer squared, items per meter squared, and pulling those values out. And this is just a start, but what we're able to do is take that data from 4 or 5 different articles, 10 different tables, and combine it and put it on a single map with some metadata about what that particle abundance value is and then what journal and table it came from. This is, I was over in Utrecht a couple of weeks ago showing this to the professor that we're working with on this, and they are really excited about this. They think this is going to be able to really help them move towards what they're trying to accomplish. We're doing similar explorations around typing of tables, and I'm just going to take a second to show you this rather than going through it in the slides. Our colleague Tony, who's the third author on this, who couldn't be here because he lives in London, went through, built a Chrome plugin that lets you start doing this analysis on the tables in real time. So what this does is it finds the fact that there are 9 tables in this paper. And it sort of shows you the patterns around them, right? Those masks that I was showing you before. And it lets you jump down to one of those tables. In this case, here's a table that clearly has those latitudes and longitudes in it. You mouse over things, it shows you the pattern. But then if you pick the column you're interested in, it's going to suggest mapping this to a type based on what it's seeing in the data itself. It's going to say, well, we think this might be either a latitude north, or maybe it's a latitude, or maybe it's a longitude, based on what it looks like, what the headers look like, and how that data is arranged. So what this enables you to do is, again, if you're a user interacting with this stuff, you go into these tables, you mark the things that are relevant to the data you're trying to curate, it collects those patterns and feeds them back into configurations for the batch processing that pull out all the data that enable you to do things like what I was showing in that previous slide, where you're putting this stuff on a map, right? Mapping to that data type. So we did the same thing with oil and gas. Looking at mapping, we essentially took the same code that we developed for the ocean plastics and applied it to this different set of tables, where we're looking at the latitudes and longitudes, as well as total organic content, and then some notion of depth, whether it's depth in the earth or depth in the water. We merged that data that we collected and built a normalized view of, this time, 21 tables from 20 articles. And we're able to do the same thing. We're able to put this across, we're able to essentially map these values derived from tables in the literature. Do I have time for a digression, do you think, or do I need to keep cranking? Because I could talk about the Wells example if people were interested in that. It just occurs to me that we didn't include that. Yeah, okay, cool, good call. So how are we doing this? Well, we're inferring this table structure, right? We're taking all the tables that we have, we're blowing them out, a row per cell of the values of the data, and showing that that value, where it is positionally, the row and column position, maybe the mask associated with it, what the data in there looks like, and then what the headers associated with it are. And we're able to do that. It builds these tremendously big data sets. So I was saying for that oil and gas stuff, we were looking at 58,000 articles. That turned into 160,000 tables. That turned into 43 million cells. So we've got this huge, essentially, table of 43 million cells of tables that give you all this additional metadata about where it's coming from and what it looks like. And then we're able to do things like further normalization, find units and measures in this. Back to the Neuroelectricorg example. Look at that and then take multiple passes through it looking for, these are your spike amplitudes. This is, I don't know the Neuroelectricorg example super well, but these are frequencies. These are that resting membrane potential. And you sort of look at where that unit is. Is it in the header? Is it in the value itself? You sort of iteratively collect more and more of this data and make sense out of more and more of it. And then find that like, oh, right, I'm visualizing it, and these are supposed to be values less than 1. Clearly, there's a problem here somewhere, either in this whole column or just in this particular value. And then you go looking for that edge case, and you find a way to sort of push it out of the data you're collecting and so forth. So the last example we wanted to talk through, and this is just very, very initial work, is this co-reference analysis stuff, right? So looking at the precision and recall scores and the evaluation metrics associated with natural language processing co-reference analysis computer science journal articles. And what we were hoping to find here is a nice correlation, right? Like that over time, the F1 scores and similar got better as people got better at doing co-reference analysis. We're not seeing that right now, and we're finding that it's because it's not quite that simple. There's a lot of different metrics that are used here. These aren't all F1 scores. Co-reference analysis testing is done on different corpuses, and those corpuses have different baseline accuracies. And so like there's no moving line through time that says we're getting better at this. One of the things we wanted to look at as we get more data for this example is, can you filter on those corpuses and then look just at, for example, this co-NL corpus or another particular corpus and just see if like, oh, okay, for those, are you seeing change over time? Are you plotting that kind of change? So where are we going with this? Comes back to where Ron sort of started off, right? We want to be able to build an interface where other people can do this kind of work. Because the stuff I was just showing you, it's pretty tedious, right? But like as we're figuring out how to do bit by bit by bit pieces of it, we can automate some of that. We can automate the collection of the tables themselves, the filtering of articles, the filter of tables, the grabbing of headers, the building of those chord diagrams, the normalization of those header values, and present a web interface that enables a researcher to go through and interact with that data in real time, right? To be able to click on the particular subset of a header value and have all the rest of this stuff in this dashboard sort of change to show you the data and the patterns that are associated with that particular header value. And as you select those and say how you want to normalize them, it sort of iteratively builds over time a process of sort of collecting, normalizing, finding more of, making more sense out of, and essentially generating these databases across an aggregation of the scientific literature in a particular domain, in order to essentially advance science, right? To be able to propose new hypotheses, find places where there are gaps in current knowledge or in investigation or in the literature, to find patterns that might be useful to look more closely at and understand, to build models on top of, to aid and inform things like mineral exploration and oil and gas exploration, and so forth. And that's really all we had to try to get through today. So that gives us about the right amount of time in terms of having some time for QA and discussion. So thanks a lot.
Thanks, Corey. So, anybody in the audience have some questions? Who will start us off? So you want to repeat the question? And
Yeah. So the question was, what do you do in cases of ambiguity in that masking where it's not clear exactly what this represents? Like the number, degree, number, S pattern is pretty self-explanatory, but that's not always going to be the case. And the answer is that some of them don't even get masked. Sometimes the mask is whatever the actual value is, or it dumbs down to something like phrase generically, or number math symbol. And part of it is really that all of those are currently regular expression based. So as we find them new ones that are particularly common in a particular domain, we add them. It's part of that iterative process, right? So if you're looking at a set of tables and you suddenly are like, oh, here's a pattern that I didn't used to understand before, but in the context of this table, I do, you pick it up. We found a great example. Do you want to talk about the PFR one?
Well, actually, I wanted to make a different point.
Okay.
But, so right now, you can look at, well, if we don't have an in the value or an in the header, maybe the caption tells us that this is degrees north, or maybe the body of the text does, or maybe not. But the more exciting thing here is that when we blow these tables out and go from one cell to a whole row of information about a cell, we're building a feature vector here. And so we can start looking not within this one article, but within many other articles. And we can say, oh, well, we've got other articles that are reporting the same amount of litter that's being collected, basically, and talking about the same kinds of locations, the same coordinates. So probably it's the same north-south orientation. And so the machine learning aspects of this, after we've built up the feature vectors from doing the first ones manually, that's the goal, right? Okay. So next question. Yeah.
So you taking these findings now and proposing schema or standards by subdomain. What's getting at is like coming from a scientific perspective, it's very annoying to format papers to every journal there, but it's also essential. And for us, it's only pretty good for years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. 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 So for those of you who couldn't hear, the question is, well, can we use this to say this is the standard of the information that you should report in this discipline? So close enough? All right. Well, no, we can't actually do that for a few reasons. One of which, this is just a research project, and it's a long way from being, anything more than that. Who knows what we'll be doing next year? And next year is only 3 months away, 4 months away. Anyway, Anne, as a former publisher of journals, I'm sure would be delighted at the idea of telling all her authors how they ought to do things. But keep in mind that what we're talking about here are, we're not talking about neuron. We're talking about, some little sub-discipline. Who are we to go and tell these people who are the experts in the field what it is they should be doing? So, what I'm hoping is that the people will collaboratively come up with these things. But we're going to see one graduate student say, oh, I think you ought to have it this way. And another graduate student someplace else, they're going to do it this way. But they're going to want to merge their data at some point, and they're going to do something. So, the hope is that gentle persuasion over time will accomplish more than dictatorial fiat.
So one sort of addition to that, in the conversations that I've had with people involved in the submission process, one of the things that we have chatted a little bit about is you come back to this interface that I showed you, right? What if when you were submitting a table, you had the capacity to say, hey, like these are latitudes, and to select the columns and associate them with an ontology that were stored on the back end and managed by Elsevier, right? To establish the connection between your data points and some taxonomy that we help manage in the broader community of the types of things that other researchers would be interested in. And then that finds its way into the markup, and it finds its way into the digitally published version of the article itself, and it makes the kind of data curation environment we're talking about sort of half done already, because a priori you're assigning a type to the values in that table itself.
Any other questions? Yeah.
So when you're doing column matching, so do you sort of take a top-down approach? Like, would you look at headers first and then the values and the weight secondly, like the importance of headers matching and the importance of values matching? Do you sort of like give one more importance than the other, or is it like a mixture?
Okay, so the question was, when we go about doing this matching, is there some sort of a hierarchy that we follow? Do we look at matching the headers first, or do we look at matching the values structures first, or what? Is that close enough? Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty much a top-down kind of thing right now. We look, what are the articles we care about? What are the tables inside those articles we care about? What are the headings inside those tables that we care about? Because we want to populate a particular target schema. And if we just pick values at random, then we're not in such good shape unless they happen to contain things like degrees north or whatever. But for most numeric values, you've just got a number here. So yeah, we need to look at what are the headings, what do they co-occur with? If we have a heading in, okay, is that nitrogen? The concentration of nitrogen, was that concentration by volume or by weight? And, or was it sample size, or who knows what? So yeah, we've got to know about the headings and what they co-occur with, what we think the meaning is, and then get into the values from there. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
So how can you determine which data point has the most impact? I mean, you just grab the old data and then just plot it, but there should be some important data set among them. So can you do that?
Right. So the question here is, can we determine what data has the most impact? What's the most important data set here? Or are we just grabbing, everything we can interpret and putting it all together in a plot? Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing, is grabbing everything we can and putting it into a plot. And then, letting people, who are the specialists in the field say, oh, that's curious, okay, because that's the way science starts. We don't start with the grand hypothesis. It's like, that's funny. I wonder why that's happening. And so, if we can put the data out there and people can look at it and ask questions like that, then they can determine what's important, because, unless you're in that sub-discipline, you're going to look at those things and not be able to tell much about it. So,
as we get better and better at connecting interfaces together, we can try to provide those experts with more and more hints to help them make that determination as effectively as they can, right? So we can look at things like citation counts. We can say, here are the papers within this set of data points that come from journal articles that were very highly cited, or that came from labs that were involved in particular funding operations, right? We can put that metadata associated with these points and let other people interpret it, but I don't think we want to be in the business of interpreting it as data scientists, unless, the co-ref example, maybe, because there are people in our lab who actually do co-reference analysis work.
Yeah.
So. But I don't want to decide what's the most important ocean plastics data. I want to leave that to my collaborators.
Yeah. Okay, any more questions? Okay, so I want to conclude with one point. You've probably heard the expression that data science is 80% munging of the data and then 20% actually doing something fun and interesting with it. Yeah, well, that's kind of what this is all about, is, what can we do to take that 80% and maybe turn that down a little bit, by, after seeing lots of examples of what people do with things called lat, or latitude, or latitude S, or this or that or the other, and formatted particular ways to say, oh, yeah, like that data typing example shows, we think this is latitude south, and if you've used Tableau and you see how it looks at the structure of your values and says, hey, I noticed that X, Y, and Z is going on. Would you like me to do A, B, and C. Can we get that kind of help in manipulating the data in these tables? That's part of the goal. Okay? Okay, well, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Ron and Corey and Ann. And, these iCube seminars, this was our first one of the year, by the way. And we are honored that Elsevier came and talked to us. The purpose is for you in the audience to get a real focused insider's view of the kind of exciting research that's going on in our affiliate companies. And I think we certainly did that today, and we invite you now for the next half hour or so to our reception out in the lobby here, and these guys are going to stick around, and I'm sure they'll be happy to talk to you about life at Elsevier or whatever else you might want to ask them. So thanks again to our speakers. Thank you.